everybody. Welcome back to the Underwater Photography Show. I am Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
Since I've been dodging hurricanes lately, Alex took the opportunity to do a one-on-one interview with Dr. Richard Smith. Some of you may have known him, but Alex had him on, excuse me, to talk about his book, The World Beneath, which has been incredibly popular. And Richard is a marine biologist, underwater photographer, author. A lot of people might know him because he has done a lot of work with pygmy seahorses. I believe he's actually discovered a pygmy seahorse or two. Perhaps I'm getting the details on that wrong, but
named them. Yeah. He was the first person to do a PhD on pygmy seahorses specifically. A lot of the advice you get as a diver, how to dive around and photograph pygmy seahorses comes from Richard's sort of advice that he widely published. And he's sort of a real expert on that area, but he's a full-on fish geek in all areas. So he runs a lot of trips for divers and photographers with a strong emphasis on seeing weird and wonderful things. And I think one of the reasons his book was such a success is that he shares that kind of passion for adventure and mixed in with kind of popular science. Although he's a scientist, the book's very much a popular science, sort of, written without the jargon. And it's just a really nice sort of rollicking read, really. And what I didn't know until I spoke to him was that actually when he was asked to write the book, they didn't realize he took photos. So the book was written as a text-only book to begin with. And then when he realized that he had photos of all these things, they then made it, and it's a very heavily illustrated book. There's pictures all the way through it. And this is the first edition. The second edition is the one that's coming out this autumn. So the book was written to work without photos, and then they had photos of all the things he's talking about because they were talking, he's talking about the things he's seen on his diving. So it's a really, really nice product, but I think it's so good because it was written, without to not be illustrated. So he describes everything and it takes you on a great adventure.
Well, as a fish geek myself, I'm looking forward to watching. So with that, here is Alex's interview with Dr. Richard Smith.
Well, welcome along, Richard. It's a real pleasure to have you on the Underwater Photography Show. I'm sorry that Matthew isn't here. He's sadly and unfortunately, he's at home in Florida. And right today, Hurricane Milton is bearing down on Florida. And I wish him and everyone else in Florida all the best as they face off that really nasty looking storm. Hopefully it loses a bit of power. Hopefully it tracks fast and they don't have too hard a time with it. But yeah, all the best for that. Anyway, Richard, it's a real pleasure to have you on. You're a photographer whose work I've followed since your very early days in underwater photography. And whenever I see you speaking at a show, I always try and catch it. And whenever and obviously we reference your writing a lot as well, whenever I'm talking to anyone, particularly on the subject of seahorses and especially the smaller varieties of seahorses. But we wanted to get you on the show because excitingly, there's a new edition of your book, and I'm a fanboy with the original edition here, coming out. I was really interested to hear about that new edition. But first of all, tell us really how this first edition came about.
Hello, Alex. Excited
Hi.
to be on the show. The first edition kind of came about quite strangely, actually. I manifested it, let's say. I'd been for years, I always dive with a little slate on my arm, and I'd been making notes, and I really wanted to write something about natural history kind of on the reef, less so than photography or particularly just science. I wanted to write natural history that was kind of accessible for people who are divers, who are interested in the detail, but also just for general public. So it's kind of popular science, natural history, all blended with some adventures under the sea. And I'd been making notes for years. So I said my New Year's resolution had been to write a book and pitch the idea to some publishers that year, which I obviously didn't get around to doing in January, because you know what January's like. And then the 2nd of February, completely out of the blue, I got an email from the publisher who ended up publishing this book, who wanted a book on seahorses. So I'm pretty sure I manifested that myself and got that going. But I think there's been some amazing books on seahorses, like Helen Scales has an awesome book, Poseidon's Steed, and like seahorses are fascinating. Obviously, that was my PhD work was on the pygmy seahorses. But I felt like I wanted to do something at a bit more broader scope. So I wrote the manuscript, and like you, I'm always off around the world. So they'd given me quite a short deadline. So I was writing 2,000 words a day in a panic. I'd give myself like weekends off before my next trip. I had to get the whole thing finished. And I said to them, can we just have like a few images on little leaves in the middle of the book so people kind of can relate to what I'm talking about who may not be divers? And I sent them like, I don't know, 50 pictures to pick from. And they were like, oh, you take pictures as well. So after that, I was like, well, yeah. So I'd written the manuscript, not necessarily to be accompanied by images, but was so happy when they were so open to the idea of having images throughout. And then they've just been so accommodating about like the print, I think, is great. And having like 350 pictures in the first edition, I think just brought so much to it. And I love that it was kids loved it too, who may not read the content, or grown-ups too, let's be honest. But there's lots of amazing pictures that share like cool creatures that everyone's super interested in seeing and sort of enjoying.
I think what I particularly liked about it is I completely agree how accessible you made it. And I think that comes both by the way you talk about the animals and the way they live their lives, but also how you interweaved your own experiences of being out there in the field with that. And
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that aspect. It's a science book that's a page turner. You want to carry on the adventure and keep reading, which I really enjoyed. And then I love the photography because it's your photography. And I think the book is so much stronger than if they, because you take pictures with that knowledge in your head and you point the camera at the things that interest and fascinate you, wanting to tell the stories that you're then going to write about. So the pictures, I think, work so well with the text because of that relationship between them.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, there's always a story. You know what it's like when there's some crazy creature you're looking for or whatever. There's always like a background to the whole adventure. So that was kind of what I wanted to share too.
But I think you'd perhaps be surprised if mingled with a wider circle of underwater photographers, because I know you often dive with a lot of the experts out there, is actually how a lot of underwater photographers really don't know what they're shooting a lot of the time, and they're reacting much more aesthetically to everything, which is often very effective in their photography. But you'd be really quite surprised how there's a lot of is that a sponge or is it a seahorse?
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I really wanted to bring up was whether was that the book was, I think, has been incredibly successful. And I don't mean this in any sort of negative way, but I think surprisingly so, it must be from your perspective that the book just really seemed to be the right book at the right time for the audience.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. Some of the feedback. I'm so happy that people have enjoyed it. I think it was the right book at the right time. It came out, the original edition came out in September 2019. And then obviously within 6 months, we were all stuck at home. So I wonder if people wanted to go on adventures, but were stuck in lockdown. So maybe the bunch of fish pictures took them on a little adventure. I think that probably helped.
I think I mean, yeah, possibly. I think it's also there's something classical about the style of it as well. Not with the pictures in there, but you could almost imagine it's a kind of a modern version of a Victorian adventure, to use a British sort of example. Writing about discoveries and adventures in far off places.
Yeah,
And
I
those
think
books in the past have been hugely popular.
yeah, and I think the discovery aspect of it is a big part of it, and like people don't realize how much we're still discovering. I mean, so the new edition I know we're going to come on to, but something important is that I've named, since the book came out, a new species of pygmy seahorse and just a few weeks ago, a new species of pygmy pipe horse. So those are two new species that I've described since the first edition came out, and people don't realize there's so much in the ocean that we still don't know about. But I think it kind of encourages people to want to protect it, is my hope.
Absolutely, I think, and I think it is a book that definitely fascinates. So, edition one exceeded everyone's expectations, and I guess that's led to a call from the publishers saying, "We're onto a good thing here. What do you want to do next?" So,
Yeah.
what is coming next?
So yeah, the new edition comes out in the US in November and then in the UK in January. But yeah, it's got probably 40 to 50 new pictures, I think. And yeah, more about these new species that I've described and the stories behind those. I continue my work with the pygmy seahorses that I'm going to show some pictures from. But yeah, some of that work has kind of evolved and not always in a super positive way. Like we'll be listing one of the new pygmy seahorses as critically endangered, quite possibly. We're just working on the red list for that now. So yeah, there's a lot to add. I also felt there were changes in the ocean in the time that we were out of it during the pandemic. We were just talking before about some spots in Alor that I'd seen real changes. But it really hit home when I was diving in Milne Bay last year, when it was just bleaching for as far as the eye can see. And it's just horrific to see that. And it's like in the 30 or nearly 30 years I've been diving, I really have seen a difference. And yeah, I'm just trying to share that and yeah, to show people what we're losing.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that incredibly diverse, biodiversity, maximum environment on the line, I do think sometimes, it doesn't get enough attention, the pressure that climate change is bringing to coral reefs. Anyway, on to more jolly things. Let's have a look at some of those pictures. So I need you now to fight the controls of Zoom and hopefully bring up your pictures, and we can have a talk through these shots. That's come up well.
Picture, I guess, like life is a journey, isn't it? Which very much like your diving career and well, for us, like it's our work as well. So back in, I mean, it's about 15 years ago, maybe, I started my PhD work on pygmy seahorses. So that before that, I'd been taking photos. There's actually even a picture in the book taken on slide, which really ages us. I gave a talk at a university. Actually, it was a while ago, but they had no idea what slide was. So that's very upsetting. But yeah, I mean, I was taking photos and actually started because I wanted to ID nudibranchs. Because they're just a nightmare. But so anyway, I was doing my PhD work. I needed to have had a background in photography to be able to sort of capture some of this stuff that's happening at such a minuscule scale. I mean, pygmy seahorses, for those who haven't seen them, are like 2 centimeters long. So they're ridiculously small. And part of my PhD work was recording their social and reproductive behaviors. So, I mean, this photo is not sort of like a maybe get on a holiday sort of thing. It's spend 6 months going to the same group of pygmies and seeing if you can record what they're up to. But I was lucky enough to see them giving birth on many occasions. I'd figured out exactly when it would be, and it was more for the research was the main thing. So I'd be down on the reef where you'd often get crazy strong currents. And I have now like figured out just hovering to take my macro shots. I don't put a finger on the reef or anything, but because I was holding my clipboard, my camera, God knows what else, it was kind of preposterous. It was like a Christmas tree. But yeah, this was one of the shots that I was really happy with, to be able to record and without having to kill the animal. Basically, I was able to see what the little babies looked like. And you can see in this shot, This is one of the males that I was studying. He was called Tom.
They called Tom, Dick, and Mary. Have I remember that
Tom,
correctly?
Dick, and Harry. Yeah.
Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Which came about because my friend, who I now lead some of the dive trips that we do, she was a dive guide at Wakatobi, where I was based, and got livid because I was a scientist calling them like 1, 2, 3, and 4, and she was like, "No, they're Tom, Dick, and Harry, and Josephine." So there was the 3 males and 1 female. But this is Tom giving birth, and you can see in the shot like a couple of babies coming out and the silvery little eye of one of the babies. Because
are you able to click on that and zoom in at all? Just so I don't know how big it's coming through on the recording.
Yeah. Is that zooming?
Yeah, really well. It's just really cool to see the detail in those babies.
Yeah, so you can see well, I can't point at it, but yeah, the shiny bit is his eye, the baby's eye, and then the top of its head. You can see the dorsal fin of the baby, and its tail is wrapped around its snout. So yeah, they're dark in color. They'll then float off in the ocean currents to find a new Gorgonian. And then they settle on a Gorgonian after probably 2 or 3 weeks. And they stay there then for the rest of their adult lives. Another part actually of which is relevant to this show was that I worked on the impacts divers have on pygmies, which can be great. I'm sure people who've seen them have seen some pretty unusual behaviors, let's say, to be kind. But yeah, these guys, they settle on a Gorgonian, and these Gorgonians are so fragile, and they stay on the same one. Once they've adapted, I found another one that took just 5 days to change from this dark pigmented color to pink to match the Gorgonian host. So once they've done that, they're kind of stuck on that same one. So if damage happens to the Gorgonian, then over time they lose their home, and they'll stay put for as long as they can. And then if they leave, then most likely they're dead. So yeah, that was an important part of my work too, just to share like how fragile these animals are and how we can avoid damaging them, really. But yeah, so this image I was really pleased with, to capture this behavior, which hadn't been shot in stills before, I don't believe.
No. I mean, yes. I mean, I think if there had been, we would have seen it. So yeah, it was I've always remembered this shot for since you first showed it.
I love that you can see his face too. He's like really panting.
He's feeling that one.
And off he went. I mean, I don't want to give away everything, but he went off to mate with Josephine straight after this shot. So just 20 minutes later, he was full of eggs again, because it's obviously the males that brood the young in seahorses. So yeah, it's just an incredible story, and I guess this is kind of what set the tone for my future work, and what is in the book as well, is that I'm really then was understanding what these, even an animal that's 2 centimeters long has this super elaborate behavior, and is so intrinsically linked with the place that it lives. It was that sparked my interest, and that's what I then moved on to studying, like these habitat specialists, and I became obsessed with parasites and all sorts of completely random natural history.
There's plenty of parasite coverage in the book for those that love a parasite.
Yeah, actually, in Alor, did you see a lot? There should have been many in Alor.
Yes, yeah. Particularly lots of the chromathoid isopods there.
Yeah, it's funny.
Not as parasite obsessed as you are, so.
Oh no, I haven't convinced you. Yeah, so I could maybe move on to the next image.
Yeah, let's look at the next one.
Is that showing?
Yeah, it's looking great. Yeah.
So this is another pygmy seahorse, and there is only honestly 1 chapter about pygmies in the book, but I am kind of obsessed. So this is the new species, the pygmy that I described from Japan. That paper came out in 2018, so that was out in the first edition. These guys, I named Hippocampus japapigu because they're found in Japan, but they have actually now been recorded in Taiwan as well. And Taiwan is turning out to be the pygmy epicenter. They have 5 species that are found there, which is interesting. I think it's kind of a crossing point for a number of different species. But this shot, I'd gone in 2013 when I was first sort of working out that there's a new species there. I wanted to see it. So I was at a conference in Okinawa, but then used early Google Translate to figure out going and exploring in Japan, which turned out to be an incredible place to dive, one of my favorite spots. But I found this island where there had been pictures of pygmies. People hadn't really clocked that they were different species. So I found like a dozen of them, then ended up describing them. But I took Ned and Anna Deloach to this island, who have done the Fish ID books, incredible divers, and have told so many amazing stories about little critters. So I was like, we've got to go and I'll show you this pygmy. And I was like, oh, I saw a dozen, there's loads, it would be easy. Of course, that was ridiculous. So I was like, there's no pygmies. And we had a cyclone or typhoon heading our way. And the last 10 minutes of the last dive before this typhoon hit, the guide found this little pygmy. So I took like 3 shots and then passed it over to Ned because he'd not seen these before. But I guess kind of what I wanted to say about that was I literally got 3 shots. But I think it's been so important to have like the background and to learn to be sort of careful with animals, because if I hadn't sort of spent so long practicing that kind of craft, I guess, there's no way I would have got a shot, I don't think, in 3 pictures of this guy. I mean, just from so much experience in that like macro kind of realm. So I'm pleased that you didn't have to manipulate it or anything, because I never do that in any of the animals that I shoot. So that's one of my.
Well, I think, I mean, you know, if you want natural behaviors to play out like you showed in the first picture and coming up next, you know, those things don't occur if you start interfering. And
Yeah.
I think that a lot of photographers in their quest for the perfect pose end up actually missing more. And I think a lot of them
100%. Like a
actually
ghost pipefish, people will turn towards you to get the nice side-on shot, which you might get for 1 fraction of a second, but after that it's in fight or flight, so it'll be off and hiding. So yeah, I'm always keen to kind of share that, just back off a little bit from the animals that you want to photograph and get nice behaviors, like you say.
So the next one looks like a behavior shot.
Yes. Ooh, I don't know how much it's zooming in here, but this is, I think, one of my favorite photos. This kind of encapsulates what I enjoy about diving. This fairy wrasse is named after Paul Heumann, who founded, or was like co-publisher with Ned on all the ID books, and they co-founded Reef, which do amazing conservation work. So this was discovered by Anna Deloach in Alor. I think it was described in 2013. So another new species, and it's called the stub-finned fairy wrasse. So you can kind of see, I wanted an image that showed the whole, so the males are the ones that have these displays and beautiful colors. The females are much smaller and kind of plain pink. And then they change sex from female to male, and the fins grow, the color changes. But they're very difficult to photograph. They're in the chilly part of Alor, where it's rough and somewhat horrific occasionally. I really wanted a shot of this guy. I'd seen one, and I now know what they look like. You can spot a female, which then makes you look out for a male, but he'll tend to have a harem, so there's not very many males around, and they use a huge area to go and find little different groups of females. So this guy was zooming between maybe 10 meters and 30 meters to go between his groups. Luckily, it was like a rubbly bottom, so I would just watch him zoom up into the shallows, then all the way back. But he just didn't stay still. But I've realized he was very vain, and he would be going to the cleaning station. So I just waited for him to go to the cleaning station, and that's often the best place to get shots of some of like these kinds of fishes, because they'll go in, they'll open all their fins, which then kind of shows their fin space for if there's parasites or anything that those cleaner wrasse are looking for. So yeah, I just really love this shot, and how I don't know if there's really been any pictures of it since. Actually, it's very rare. But although I have now seen it in Wakatobi and up in Triton Bay, all over the place. Actually, it's quite
all right. Much warmer, easier conditions.
Yeah, exactly. I'm happier with that. But I'll always remember this shot. Yeah, so I love this one. Okay, and the next one. So something that just kind of inspires the book, and there's a lot of talk of it. And we mentioned like the high biodiversity on coral reefs, and that biodiversity sort of comes about by the layers of life upon life, and all these symbioses and commensalisms and all sorts of interactions between species. I mean, even corals themselves, I guess, are a symbiosis between an algae and a cnidarian, a little jellyfish thing. And that then supports the whole coral reef's life. But this guy kind of blows my mind. So this is a hermit crab, obviously. It's a nocturnal hermit crab, which hermit crabs of this group use the shells of dead mollusks. So like a snail would have lived in that shell. Then when that died, the hermit crab finds the perfect size for it. As it grows, it changes shells and stuff. But to protect itself at night, this guy has specific anemones that it sticks onto its own shell, or onto the shell of the snail. But on those anemones lives a little crab. So there's a little porcelain crab. You can probably just
Maybe
see.
you can zoom in on him of the eye there.
So yeah, you can see the little porcelain crab sitting on the shell behind, but it's an undescribed porcelain crab, unsurprisingly. But so that little porcelain crab only lives on those anemones that only live on the dead shell of a snail that is used by that crab, which it just kind of blows my mind. It's just incredible. And actually, when I look back at some old pictures of the same hermit crab from Lembe from years ago, I actually had seen that crab. I just hadn't clocked it. The little porcelain crab I actually photographed by accident in the past.
Bycatch, we call it. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So these are widespread. I took this in Papua New Guinea, but I've seen it all through Indonesia and Philippines and things. So I think probably anywhere you're seeing these nocturnal hermit crabs, have a look for the little porcelain crab that's living on there.
But it sounds like most of the book is just going to be the caption to explain.
I know, it's pretty ridiculous. And what do you name it? Like, I call it the hermit crab, which looks like a typo, but yeah, it's not. So the final image that I have, I took on that trip that I mentioned before to Papua New Guinea. I went to Milne Bay, a really remote area. It's also well protected. There's a big marine reserve around the area. There's very low human population, but we just rolled in and the whole reef was white. Just, I would say 90% of the corals were bleached. And we were there for 6 weeks. We had 3 trips there. So it was, I think I got PTSD from it, to be honest. But that really kind of galvanized in my mind that we do need to spread the word more about what's going on in the oceans and how much we are losing. So during the 6 weeks, the corals that we saw bleach then died, the tissue sloughed off, and algae started to settle, and the reefs then changed forever. It was a really horrible thing, and I don't want to bring the mood down, but I think it's also important, whilst also having shared about the amazing animals that there are, I think it's important also to remember how much is being lost. And hopefully,
especially in an area which is, otherwise so pristine, so diverse, so protected from all the other issues that affect things. That's how indiscriminate the global warming can be.
In such, it was scary. And it affects
the goby is very effective subject to use against the white.
Yeah, well, and I guess I tend not to be as savvy as that. I was just looking for animals that rely on hard corals directly. So these guys lay their eggs on Acropora corals. So they were still okay at the moment. I mean, they, to be honest, don't care probably too much apart from with predators coming in to get them, that the coral's white. Because they lay their eggs on the tissue, which at this point would have still been alive. But it's when the coral then is dead and the algae settle on that coral and kind of change the structure of it, then they'll struggle after that. But I also did see, if you've heard of the Galaxia coral pipefish, which is a little guy that lives between the polyps of a hard coral, I saw those bleaching en masse. The little pipefish is black basically, and just looked stuck out like a sore thumb. And like pygmies, they don't have a plan B. If this coral dies, there's not really, they can't just relocate, because I mean, it was tens of miles that we saw of bleaching. Yeah, it's scary, but I think it's important to also remember that this is happening in the world, sadly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's very much part of the story of coral reefs these days. You can't talk about, this and that amazing environment without, sadly, having to reflect on the fact it's under pressure on so many fronts. To bring us back to a more cheerful note, do you want to stop the presentation and then one of the things that I think has been amazing with the book is just how well it's gone down, and I would hope that it's a book that's going to stay in print for a long time, because I think it's a really valuable introduction to anyone who's fascinated by the underwater world, but particularly coral reefs. And I think because it gives you a level of education that you wouldn't pick up with elsewhere, because it's so readable, yet across that you get a real flavor for for how reefs function, but particularly how much we're still learning about this environment that sadly is also really under pressure. To sort of just tell me a little bit about sort of how do you deal. I mean, you talked about the post-traumatic stress feeling from that bleaching trip. I mean, it's something that I find very difficult photographically, is wanting to tell those stories without constant doom and gloom images. And then also the fact that bleaching itself is quite photogenic. And if the pictures are shown without illustration, they can be quite hard for the public to understand. And I think that bleaching is a very hard story to tell. And that's why I like that image. But I think my question is how do you grapple with those elements and communicate that across images and also in the book of.
Yeah, it is difficult because I mean, I had guests on the trip when we were in PNG, like Wendy and I came up like almost in well, we did have tears, I must be honest, but guests would be like, oh, it was so beautiful. And yeah, it is beautiful. I mean, you don't see white landscapes like that underwater. I mean, it's something from the Alps. But people sort of know about bleaching, but yeah, it is a complex story. So I think I've just been trying to do sort of education, write about it as much as I can. I found I had a really lovely shot actually of a little lemon damsel, bright yellow damselfish in a bleached coral, but the coral was bright pink because it's called colorful bleaching. When the coral is so stressed and bleached, it's lost the zooxanthellae, those symbiotic algae that provide the energy and everything. But it's produced the pink pigment to act like a sunscreen. So it's neon pink. There's a bright yellow fish and it's beautiful, but it's kind of actually, in telling the story, it's useless because people are like, oh, it's beautiful, but that isn't really what I'm trying to say. It's it's the pure white, and then also trying to educate at the same time about what that means. But yeah, it's not an easy story. And I think another part of the story is that we're lucky to see coral reefs, but people don't always relate to what that even means. Like coral reefs are in such a tiny area of the planet that we travel to those spots to see them, but you may see them on a Attenborough show or something, but that really doesn't give you the same feeling as diving on a coral reef and really relating to that. So that is also what I wanted to do with the book, was take you on kind of a journey and immerse you in a coral reef so that you knew what we might lose. Like, because I'm kind of doom and gloom about it at this point with the bleaching, but also the main story is to take you on a journey so you know what there is there, and then it's kind of I sort of say about what's happening, but it's not rammed down your throat the whole time, because I think you need to relate and enjoy it.
And I don't think, as you say, you get too much of that, of the doom and gloom, and you struggle to process it. But I think the fact that you tell the stories about the discoveries, which, and the fact that they're ongoing and new things are still being found, shows how much there is out there still to discover. I think the layers of biodiversity and the interdependency of species also, I think, links very well with what's at stake. And the fact that it is such a globally important repository of biodiversity. It's, the Arctic, I always feel, gets, and the Antarctic gets such a focus of climate change because they've got specific big charismatic species up there. And obviously those environments are important for the planet as a whole. But the potential biodiversity loss of climate change in tropical reefs is orders of magnitude higher than the loss of habitat in the polar regions, and I don't feel it gets enough attention. So,
and it's happening now. It's not something that may happen if we don't change things. Like, it really is happening. So we need to be aware of that, I think.
Yeah, you and I though shouldn't talk ourselves into this sad corner too much. So remind me again when the new edition of the book is out.
In the US, it's in November 19th,
Yeah.
and in the UK in January.
And it's called still The World Beneath.
It is The World Beneath. Yeah, it's the enhanced second edition. It has, I think, 40 odd new pictures and new preface and new discoveries, even some I haven't even mentioned.
I hope so.
To come.
Yeah, to look forward to. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Richard, for coming on the Underwater Photography Show. I know I'd be gutted that he wasn't able to join us for this conversation. But I wish you all the best on your forthcoming trip. You're off to Fiji next, I think.
Yes, a couple of days, Fiji for a month. There's some new stuff I'm looking for out there as well. So hopefully be working on that in the future too.
Excellent. Thanks very much for coming on. Bye.